Hello,
Hello.
Mike Sokol.
I love the contract classes. I try and always make them.
You are a weirdo.
Yeah, but then other people were like, "I need help with the contract," and I'm like, "I'll help you out."
I'll help you out. I know how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. I'm glad you could be here.
Tax site amendment is passed, it will absolutely negatively affect other.
So I'm on my iPad and I'm gonna fire up my laptop. Which one are we going through specifically?
Car contract, listing and buyer.
Listing and buyer. Okay.
I'm going to share my screen here. We're a little bit early, so we will see.
Yeah.
There we go. Welcome to the Chicago Association of Realtors contracts class. Today we're going to go over the listing and buyer contracts, and I'll answer any questions you have. This class is really designed to walk you through completing the contracts. It is not necessarily a negotiations class, but I am a strong believer that your contracts are the basis for your negotiating. So we will get through as much as we can today. I'd love it if you can turn cameras on for those of you who are able. Those that have your cameras on, I appreciate it. This is meant to be somewhat of an interactive class, so please speak up, raise your hand if you have questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions because that's how you learn best. So appreciate that. Who here, just by voice or raise your hands, is primarily at the O'Hare location? Anyone who's primarily at Lakeview?
I'm at Lakeview.
I am.
Okay.
This is Anissa. Thank
Hi,
you.
Anissa, great. And then what about Lincoln Park? We have a couple Lincoln Park folks here. Okay, cool, awesome. I think at the moment we are probably all sort of on different systems. I'm going to talk you through a couple of ways that you can find contracts. You may have some other way to find contract at your particular location. Let's talk about the buyer contract. So if you can find your buyer contracts in DocuSign for the most part. Most of the offices have templates set up in DocuSign. So I'm going to log in here to my DocuSign. And I'm going to go to templates up here at the top. I'm going to go to all templates, and then I'm able to search my templates. Let's see if typing in car will pull up the documents that I'm looking for. Great. So when I typed in car, Chicago Association of Realtors, it brought up a ton of car contracts, car residential contract, car multifamily investment, and then some other ones that you probably won't use very often. So this is one way that you can find the contracts you're looking for. Another way to find them is by logging in to the Chicago Association of Realtors. This is not really where I wanted to be, but I'm glad that I do not have a balance due, so that would be embarrassing. Let's go back here. Here we go. If you go to chicagorealtor.com, you can come over here to Realtor Tools, scroll down to Forms and Contracts, and you'll have to sign in. I'd already signed in. And you can find pretty much all of the most up-to-date contracts here at chicagorealtor.com. So we have This one right here says car contracts. You can also use this bar at the top to search for the contracts you want. So I just typed in lead and it pulls up lead-based paint pamphlet, a writer, another lead-based paint. So you can use this search bar. We are gonna come down here to the car contracts and look at those again. You've got residential real estate purchase and sale, condo real estate purchase and sale, deeded parking. If you're just listing a parking space, you can put that here. You can also use the, the regular car contracts for parking and that sort of thing. So this is another way. The neat thing about the tools here at chicagorealtor.com that you may or may not have in your DocuSign templates. I know Lincoln Park has templated DocuSign contracts in DocuSign, so they're already ready for you to fill in. I am not sure about the other two locations, but if you open a contract here, you can download it as a PDF, and it is a fillable PDF. So you can come in here and type in the information that you need to put in this contract. Any questions so far about that? Okay.
Kara, this is Anissa. I have a question. I don't have templates in my DocuSign. I just have like dashboard, rooms, inbox, my docs, and then personal and forms. So is that something I have to set up? And forgive me, I'm a newer broker.
Are you a Lakeview?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, I would just check with Mike Saladino. There may be some special trick. Or it's possible they don't have them templated. We will have templated ones once we all on board to One Chicago.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, in the meantime, I'd use one of these other methods. And some, to be honest, lots of people don't use the templates in DocuSign. They use one of these other methods. So
okay.
Kara, this is Ann. They are not templated at Lakeview.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yep.
So that explains that, Anissa, you won't have to reach out, but we will have templated ones for One Chicago. So in the meantime, feel free to use the ones here at Chicago Association of Realtors, or I'm going to show you another way to find documents. If you log into your MLS, and this particularly is for, I don't really like to use the forms on here just to like pull up a form and fill it out because they're not necessarily updated in the MLS. Our MLS covers a wide range of the northern part of our state here. And so they're not always updated to the most recent ones. It takes a little time. However, if you are going to write an offer on a current listing, you can often find the documents as a part of the listing. Let's see, does anyone have a listing right now that I could pull up? And you have to have a list. Do you have a listing right now?
You can do 1532 North Paulina.
Perfect. 1532 Paulina. New, congratulations. So if I click on this MLS listing, and my clients really love it, I can go over here to additional information. Can everyone see that? Click on additional information. I can scroll down. Hold on, I have to move the window. To write a contract. So I can click on write a contract. I can create a new folder because I've not written a contract on this property before. I can even choose to notify the listing broker that I'm writing a contract. I generally choose not to do this. I'll communicate with the listing broker directly. I'm gonna select next, and it's actually gonna auto-populate everything from the listing agent entered in the MLS into these fields, which will then become the contract. So as you can see, the address, the PIN number is in here. All I have to do is fill in buyer information, whatever seller information I know. It even auto-populates the buying broker, that'd be me, I'm writing the offer, and the selling broker, the listing broker. So you can add in attorney information, whatever you need, hit continue, and it's going to populate a contract for you. So that's a really quick, fast way for all of us who are slightly on the lazier side, and also you have to pay a little less attention to the detail because a lot of that's going to auto-populate from the MLS listing. So just one other way for you to find the contracts that you need. Any questions about that? All right, we're going to go back to the chicagorealtor.com website and look at these contracts just because they're easy for us in learning here today, and we can fill them in. Can everyone see my screen okay? Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, fantastic. So this is the, actually I'm gonna open up the condo contract. So there's the residential real estate purchase and sale contract. That would be more useful for like a single family home, a fee simple. I'm gonna open up the condominium real estate purchase and sale contract because it's a little more detailed. There are a few more things that have to be handled with the sale of a condo. So let me blow this up a little bit. All right, so here we go. This is a listing contract, right? You are going to list a condo for an owner. This contract is between the brokerage and your client, your seller. You are the one facilitating this contract, but this sets up the expectations. It's a great way to start having those expectation conversations with your clients. So the contract here, I encourage you to read these contracts, read them again. Mike Sokol's been in this business for what, almost a year, Mike?
Yep.
And he comes to like all the contract classes he can. The contracts do change from time to time. I would urge you to read them because this is how you negotiate your business. This is how you determine how you're getting paid. This is an agreement by your seller that protects you when you go list their refrigerator as being a part of the sale. If you've not had that conversation and they're planning to take their refrigerator, which by the way, almost never happens, but just as an example, you might be buying a refrigerator for your client if you didn't get this paperwork filled out correctly. So it is important. This condominium real estate purchase and sale contract is made by and between blank buyer. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This is for the, this is for your purchase. I'm sorry, not your listing. Let's go back and start that over again. If you're buying if your clients, your buyers buying a condo, and we'll go back and talk about the listing agreement later. This is your buyer contract. Sorry, I just opened the wrong one. You're gonna enter your buyer's name here. Best practice is that you put in their full legal names for your buyers here. You can get that information from passport, driver's license, etc. But people often go by common nicknames or not their full given names. So make sure that just best practice, you don't have to come back and change it later when the lender asks you, to update it. It's just going to save you a step. This also can help you to make sure that you're actually writing up the contract for the right person. There are certainly juniors and seniors and first, seconds, and thirds and all of that. So make sure you understand what their full given names are. Anyone who's on the mortgage is likely going to be on this contract, and that's a good conversation to have with the lender. Whose names are actually going to be on this contract. And then the seller's name. Sometimes you don't know the seller's name. Sometimes the seller's an entity, right? You can look at the tax records to see who the seller of record is. Sometimes that is incorrect. You can also put in here owner of record, or OOR, and this can be updated at a later time if you're not entirely sure who the seller is. Sometimes it's a trust or something like that. With respect to the purchase and sale of the real estate and improvements located at, and this is going to be your property address. I would include city, state, and zip code because that's going to make it easier for everyone who's handling the contract. The property PIN number. This is your.
Well, maybe we need it for here.
Oh, please mute if you're having other side conversations. The property PIN number is also, you can find that a number of ways. You can find that in the tax records. You can also find that on the MLS. So if we go back to the MLS, to this property, the PIN number is down here. If you click on the PIN number, it will actually open all of the tax information about this property. So this one says owner name, Stephen Benson, right? So you can find lots of information there. So make sure you put in the PIN number. Sometimes there's more than one PIN number as well. Property includes parking. Is there parking? Is there a parking space number? You can find this from the deed by going to, well, hopefully you can find it in the listing. Sometimes you can find it in the listing. Sometimes you can ask the listing agent. Sometimes they have no clue. Sometimes your sellers have no clue when you're on the listing side. You can find this from the deed if you go to Cook County Recorder and look at the deed. If we have time towards the end of the class, I will buzz over to that website so we can take a look at it. But you need to understand with this parking space, is it deeded? Do they own this piece of property separate from everything else? Is it assigned by the condo association? Is it a limited common element? How do they own or utilize this space? Some buildings have assigned parking spaces. Every unit or certain number of units have an assigned space, and it transfers with the sale, it conveys with the sale. It's not deeded separately. They can't rent it out separately. They can't sell it separately. They're not paying taxes on it separately. That's going to be probably an assigned or limited common element parking space. Deeded means they're paying a separate tax bill for that. They can sell it. Oftentimes they can rent it depending on the rules of the building, but they could actually sell it separate from their unit. So what is that parking space number? Are they selling it? And how are they conveying that? Is it indoor or outdoor? If it's deeded, that parking space will have its own PIN number. They might have to pull out their last tax statement to get that information, or you can find it on sometimes on the deed. Most people know their parking space numbers. Their storage space numbers a little bit different. They often don't, unless it's painted right on the door. They don't necessarily remember what their storage space number is. High rises are a little bit better about this than smaller 3-flat buildings. But you're going to want to put in the storage space number. They don't have it right away. That's okay. You can fill in this space TBD and find it later. But be assured the buyers are going to want to know what this information is, and they're going to make sure that storage space is empty during final walkthrough. So find out what it is eventually. Don't hold up a contract waiting for it though. And again, is the storage space deeded? I don't think, I don't know if Ann is still on the call or not. In my 14 years, I've never seen a deeded storage space. They do exist. I think very more rare, but Ann, are you on?
I would agree, very few. Just some of the newer buildings, it was part of the sale price, but just a handful of them, I think.
Yeah. So oftentimes these are assigned, and there will be a number associated with that. Sometimes the property management companies or condo associations have different numbers than what was originally given to it. But again, you can sort this out during attorney review. Don't hold up a contract for it, but if it's, do know if it's deeded or not. Any questions so far? It's a lot of information. Okay, moving on. Fixtures and personal property. I see a ton of listing contracts come across without any of these things noted, and we'll talk about that on the listing contract. As a buyer, as a buyer's agent, you want to ensure that you are selecting all of these that are applicable in order for that equipment, that property to convey in the sale. So if you don't put refrigerator again, or oven, or, you know, any of those things, the seller could remove those and your buyer is not going to be very happy. I typically look at the MLS listing to guide me on this. Now, the MLS listings are only filled out as well as the listing agent fills them out. So sometimes you might have to ask, or you know, if it doesn't list the refrigerator, but there's clearly a refrigerator in the home, you might check it and let the listing agent come back to you to negate that if it's a problem. So I'm gonna look down here to see what is included. Oven, range, microwave, dishwasher, refrigerator, washer, dryer, disposal. When we talk about the listing, these are all very important things to include on your listing agreement and in your MLS listing, so people can find your properties. But it's also important for the buyer's agent then to be able to fill out the contract here. So you're going to check all that apply. If there's a, you know, a refrigerator in the kitchen plus one in the basement that, you know, the MLS listing says it's, you know, it conveys, or your buyer really wants it, then you're going to put 2 after here. You're going to say there's 2 refrigerators that are conveying with this sale. Does that make sense? I think these are garbage disposals. There's not a ton of places with garbage disposals in the city, but you know, double check the MLS listing. You can always ask. I think one that I see frequently that becomes an issue is the window air conditioners. So in your older buildings that don't have central air, there'll be window air conditioners. Those definitely are not going to convey if you don't have them written in, and you want to ensure you know how many window air conditioners are in there if that's important to your buyer. So if there's 3, you're going to want to type in 3. And the seller can always counter that out if it wasn't something they were planning to include, but you want to just make sure that you're including the right things here. Lighting fixtures. That means all lighting fixtures that are attached, you know, to the walls or the ceilings. I've never written in how many, because I didn't walk through the place and count how many light fixtures. I'm just saying light fixtures in general. Tack down carpeting if you have carpeting in rooms. Just want to make sure that you're covering yourself here and including anything that the buyer reasonably expects to convey. Seller shall also transfer the following. This is kind of an open line for you to add things. If you might find a listing that says pool table included. If your buyer's okay keeping that pool table, you know, you're going to write pool table in here. If your buyer does not want the pool table, they're going to write the pool table in excluded from transfer, meaning I don't want that thing in there, get it out before closing. So these are important lines here. Purchase price. This is the line that everyone looks for. All of our buyers are looking for. The thing that you're talking about the most is the purchase price. So this is where you would write that. If you're writing, you know, 500,000, you'd write it out like that. Closing costs. If you're a newer agent, even if you're not a newer agent, we're always looking at the closing cost line, because this closing cost is going to affect everyone's pocketbook, right? It's going to affect your bank account. If I wrote an offer for 500,000, but I also wrote seller agrees to credit buyer at closing $5,000. Oh, I don't know. It's not liking me. Oh, it won't let me type in. What's going on? Anyway, this offer is really $495 if you're asking for $5,000 in closing costs, right? So, or a percentage here. Sometimes you'll see 3% or 6% of purchase price. This are to be applied to prepaid expenses, closing costs, or both as the lender permits for the buyer. So sometimes our buyers just aren't cash heavy and they need a little assistance in closing. They can get the loan, they can cover, but they would prefer to keep some of their cash. Sometimes that's where you would put in a closing cost credit. This is different than like an inspection credit or something like that. Now, if you walk in and you know the windows are in bad shape without having an inspector look, and you want a credit for those windows, right? You could put it in here. It ultimately just affects the bottom dollar price. Home warranty.
Kara, I'm sorry. Kara, this is Mark. I just had a question about that number 4.
Sure.
Is that something that you see regularly used in negotiations, or is that something that's regularly omitted?
So it's going to be market dependent. In a buyer's market, you will see the closing cost credit option used much more frequently. In a seller's market, where the seller has the upper hand, you do not see it as much. So I haven't seen a ton of these over the last, I don't know, 5-ish years. It also can be somewhat dependent on the price point of the property. In a, first purchase sort of price range for any particular neighborhood, somebody who's just buying their first property, you'll tend to see closing cost credits a little bit more. Just newer, younger buyers don't maybe have as much saved up. They have good jobs, their credit is good, they can get the loan, but they just maybe don't have as many reserves. So you'll see that a little more often. I would say use this as needed. If your client can't close without those closing cost credit, you're gonna have to use this line. However, you need to be judicious, right? If the fair market value of the home is $200,000, and your clients need, $10,000 to close. If you write a $200,000 offer and then ask for $10,000 in closing costs, that bottom line to the seller is $190. In a seller's market, they're probably going to get better offers than that. So you need to be understanding of the market, understanding of the likelihood of the home appraising, the value that it'll appraise out at. If you write it simply for 210 in order to get that 10,000, and then write for the 10,000 credit to get the seller at 200, you need to make sure that that house can actually appraise for 210, because that appraiser is going to look at that and go, hey, they wrote an offer above list, asked for 10,000 to make the seller happy, but is the bank going to be okay with this property appraising at 210? So it is used a lot, and it's going to be dependent on the market, the property itself, et cetera, et cetera.
That was helpful, Kara. What I hear you saying is that you don't really use it as a negotiation tool. You use it as a tool to help with the financing and the closing, not so much as like, I'm going to go ahead and try to get some money back now through some sort of negotiation. Because that's how my buyers have kind of approached that. Well, let's ask for some closing credits back. And I always told them it was better to just negotiate the price. And it sounds like you confirm that this is more of a tool to use for financing and things.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Ultimately, the sellers are getting the purchase price minus the closing cost credit. So it's, I think I've had a conversation a number of times over my career. This isn't free money, right? This isn't, this is coming out of somebody's pocket. And so the seller's always going to look at their bottom line. It can, it can be a negotiating tool, but it's really meant to be used for when it's, when it's needed for someone to sell or someone to buy. In a buyer's market, you'll see it be much more common, where like 80% of people are using a closing cost credit. But it shouldn't be used to like get money back, right? It's that purchase price it is what it is. That bottom line to that seller, that's what they're getting, whether using the closing cost credit or not. Some sellers their response to closing cost credit is, why are they buying a house if they can't afford it? Why do they want my money? They sometimes can take it personally, and as a listing agent, you can guard against that by preparing your clients in advance, and having to talk them or walk them through what, the purpose is. And it's okay to call the buyer's agent and say, hey, I see you're asking for closing cost credit. Can we talk about why that's important to your client? And sometimes it's like, hey, they can't close without this. So then that's a great tool for you to go back and have a conversation with your seller. Hopefully that answers the question. Use it when it's needed, and use it sparingly, because there can be emotions around that from the list side.
Kara, what about like a cash buy? How would you use that in a cash buy?
You wouldn't, right? For a cash buyer, they have cash. They're gonna pay for the property outright. They wouldn't pay $200,000 in cash and ask for $5,000 back. They would just, offer $5,000 less, probably.
So that would just be an NA line on a.
Yeah. You can NA. You can leave it blank. This particular one, you can leave blank. So, yep. All right. Any other questions about that? Those are great questions. Okay. Home warranty. Not very many people fill out home warranty. You'll see it more again in a buyer's market, where buyers they have the upper hand in negotiating. I use home warranties for my buyers. When I walk through that home on that showing, I pay attention to the mechanicals. I pay attention to the appliances. You'll get better and better at this depending on, how long you've been in this business. You'll know what year the countertops were probably installed within, a 3 to 5 year range. Same with appliances. You'll get used to those. You can actually look in the mechanicals, usually can see the age that they were when they were installed. That's typically within about a year or two time frame. If I know that the appliances, the mechanicals, or even one or two of either are probably nearing their lifespan, I might suggest that a buyer request a home warranty. This helps prepare them when they do the inspection and they find out that that the furnace is 25 years old. It helps in that conversation. Hey, when we walked through, I told you that the furnace is likely older. We requested this home warranty so you would have some coverage for these sorts of things. The furnace works fine. It's safe. We cannot ask for a brand new furnace when there is currently a working, safe furnace in the property. What we can do is get this home warranty for you that we've requested to protect you from the major costs of that expense. It will help you budget and plan for future appliance and mechanical replacement. Typically a home warranty is going to cost somewhere in the, $575 to $650 range for a year. You can get a couple of years at maybe a little bit of a discount. I'm typically going to write in here no less than $600. So this would be seller paying for the buyer's home warranty at closing. And I'd write in 600. Now, again, this is one of those instances. If you're trying to win a deal and there's multiple offers, you probably don't want closing cost credits on there. You probably don't want a home warranty listed on there. This is to be used in appropriate circumstances in the market that allows you to do this. But it will help you in your conversation later when that inspection comes in, because the buyers are like, they accepted our offer and they're really high up here and excited. And then they do the inspection and they're like, but we're going to have to buy a new furnace, right? And then they're down and they're low. This helps kind of, set that expectation that, hey, the furnace is, you know, older. Let's see what the inspector says. Hey, you have this home warranty. They're going to give you some coverage. There's a number of home warranty companies that you can use out there. HSA is one that I've used frequently in the past. There's plenty of others. I would just tell you to read the fine print on the home warranty, determine what they cover. And you'll need to set the expectation about home warranties with your sellers, because it isn't. Okay. It isn't call whatever plumber you want, have them come out, you know, whenever they want, and you know, they're going to cover 100%. There's certainly fine print to those, and there'll be home warranty classes coming up soon to discuss that a little bit further. Any home warranty questions? All right. Earnest money. You will find that there is spot here for 2 sets of earnest money. Upon the party's execution and delivery of this contract, buyer shall deposit with escrowee. Currently, Lakeview and O'Hare do not hold earnest money. Lincoln Park does hold earnest money. One Chicago, once we onboard, will hold earnest money. So for those of you in Lincoln Park, for the most part, when you're the buyer's agent, the listing agent is going to be the escrowee. Now, obviously not in all cases. We just said Lakeview and O'Hare don't hold earnest money. So Mike Sokol, if you were doing a deal with Ann Rosen, Ann is at Lakeview, Mike is at Lincoln Park. Mike, you might have a conversation with Ann that says, hey, I see that you don't hold earnest money. Is it okay if my brokerage holds earnest money? And Ann's going to say, that would be great. So Mike, in this case, you're going to type in Keller Williams, Chicago, Lincoln Park is the escrowee. In many cases, it's going to be 90% of the time, it's going to be the listing agent. Your MLS listing says at the bottom whether they hold earnest money. Right here, holds earnest money, yes. If it says no, then just have a discussion with the agent about who holds earnest money. If it's not either of the listing brokerages, an attorney, a real estate attorney that has an escrow account can hold the earnest money. So it could be the seller's attorney or the buyer's attorney. And also sometimes the title companies will hold money, earnest money. So those are your options. It should never be the seller, a friend. It should never be you. You should not have your own escrow account. Only your designated managing broker or sponsoring brokerage holds earnest money as far as agents go. But again, title company or attorneys can also be escrowee. Earnest money in the amount of, this is a dollar amount, so you're going to put in the dollar amount. Often the question is, how much should that be? Well, that's a discussion between you and your buyer. The most important part is for you to make sure that the buyer knows that this earnest money check that they're going to write or have their bank write will be cashed. So if we're holding earnest money, we're cashing that earnest money check and holding that money in an escrow account. So there's a common myth out there that we're just holding on to your check in a paper file and seeing what happens here with this deal. That money, that check will be cashed. So they need to have those funds ready and available. I'm going to always tell you that a bank issued check, not a money order, but a bank check, certified funds is the best way to provide earnest money. A personal check can be used. Some brokerages will allow wires, allow you to wire that money in, but there's going to be additional paperwork with that. When you're the buyer's agent, you're gonna take your direction from the MLS or from the listing agent. These are all really great questions to ask before you write this contract. It's also a great time to try to figure out what the seller's motivation is as you're negotiating a deal. So how would you prefer earnest money? You can write it in here. So you might write personal check, bank check, certified funds, wire, etc. Within how many business days? So typically we're going to see this between 1 and 3 business days. 3 business days is probably on the longer end of what we typically see. Again, make sure your client has the funds ready and available for their check to be deposited. The earnest money shall be increased by a percentage if you check this box, or by a dollar amount if you check this box, within X number of business days after conclusion of attorney approval. So there's a spot on this contract for initial earnest money and final earnest money. There's reasons that people use 2 earnest monies, and there's reasons that they don't. The first is you can put a smaller amount up until you get through attorney review to make sure inspection is going to go smoothly. And once it does and you agree to the terms, then you increase that earnest money with that final earnest money deposit to be whatever that end total earnest money amount is going to be. This is helpful when it takes time to get earnest money back. If the deal falls apart during attorney review, you and your buyer can go write an offer on another place while you're waiting for that earnest money to get returned, right? So if it was wired in, it might get wired back. If it was a check, if it was a personal check and we're holding it, we'd have to make sure that personal check clears the bank before we can issue a refund. So that can take 7 days if you're, holidays, weekends. If you mail it, it could take another 3 weeks to get it to you, right? So with wires and certified checks, those clear the bank much more quickly. So those are reasons to potentially use those methods. But if your buyer put $1,000 or $5,000 down initially, and their total earnest money was going to be, say, $20,000, well, they still have money in the bank to go, once this deal is canceled, to go right on another deal without, waiting for their cash to come back. This is more of a problem, either the less money, the lower price point, or the higher price point, that those monies become more significant and more important. So however, my business practice is only to do 1 earnest money. I think it just is a strong show, unless it's just not going to work for my client based on their time frame. It's a strong show of support, like, hey, I'm putting up X% of earnest money right up front. We mean business. And also because I'm lazy. I do not want to do extra deadlines that could potentially cause this contract to fall apart, extra receipts, extra clearing of the bank of those checks for that lender. Those lenders want to see that money clear. It just delays the time frame. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way. There's not. It's going to be based on what your client's needs are. My personal preference is, when at all possible, we issue 1 earnest money so that there's less human error involved in all of that. Questions about that? There's usually questions.
Yeah, what are your options for, say, the inspection went sideways? What are your options for getting that earnest money, since you only have 1 and not 2?
It's the same thing. So if you're canceling during any of the contingencies you've written in, your buyer's going to get their earnest money back, right?
Gotcha.
So if you cancel during attorney review, your buyer's going to get that earnest money back. Now, if your buyer cancels a day before closing outside of mortgage, contingency, they're going to be more screwed that way. But they're going to, at that point, they will have paid the second amount of the final earnest money anyway. So as long as they're within their contingencies,
yeah,
they'll be able to get that back. But it's a good question. It is a consideration.
Okay, thank you.
What other questions do we have about earnest money? There's no right or wrong amount. This is a negotiation. There are some old school Chicago agents who will tell you, I've never seen less than 3%, or I've never seen less than 5%. Well, maybe they haven't. And maybe that is, you know, more normally seen, but there is not a set percentage or amount. That's going to be a negotiation between buyer and seller. The more earnest money, the stronger the offer looks, right? All right, mortgage contingency. Parties agree that this contract is or is not subject to mortgage contingency. If they're getting financing, you're gonna want this to be contingent on mortgage financing. That way, if rates spike up, somebody loses their job, your buyer's able to get out of this deal and keep their earnest money because of the mortgage contingency. If they can't get the loan to buy it, it's not going to, you know, go over well at the day of closing. So we're going to assume here that we're getting a mortgage. The parties agree that this contract is subject to mortgage contingency. Upon buyer securing by first commitment date, a written mortgage commitment for a fixed rate or an adjustable rate mortgage permitted to be made by a U.S. or Illinois Savings and Loan Association bank or other authorized financial institution in the amount of dollar amount or percent. Because you're writing an offer here, the price that you're paying is not necessarily set in stone. So I'm always going to choose a percentage here. If I know that they're putting 20% down, then they're going to need an 80% mortgage. This is an easy spot for people to get confused. They'll often put 20% because that's how much they're putting down, but this should be the remainder after the down payment. So 80% of the purchase price, the interest rate, if an adjustable rate mortgage, not to exceed X percent per year. So let's actually go back up here to this first commitment date. Mike Sokol, what do you write in here for your first commitment date?
I don't remember. I feel like the other ones that I filled out were the multi-board, and I guess I've never done this one for this side. So you got me on that one.
So most, at least in my experience, most agents aren't even paying attention to this line when they're negotiating the contract. There are some that will. I typically put mine for about a week, like 7 to 10 days prior to that closing date. If it's a really quick closing, sometimes that changes. Occasionally an agent will push back and say, hey, we want that commitment date to be earlier. I'm typically putting it about a week to 10 days prior to the closing date to give us enough time. And again, like I think twice in my career, 14 years, has someone actually pushed back on that. So back down here, I'm going to put a percentage. They're getting 80%. That way, if the price changes, the price that you guys are negotiating changes, you don't have to remember to come back and change this amount because that's going to change. But if it's a percentage, it doesn't matter where you end up in price. If they're still putting 20% down, you still need an 80% mortgage. The interest rate here, this is to protect your buyer and also is potentially a point of contention for the seller. It's a term that can be negotiated. If interest rates are running at 3.5%, as a buyer's agent, I want to protect my buyer, but I also want the interest rate written in here for the seller not to push back at it. So I might put 4% in here if 3.5 is the average, 3.5% is the going rate, because we know that rates can change, right? And we want a little wiggle room without being unended. If this had zero, if there was no interest rate minimum, they potentially could be forced to take a 12% per year mortgage because there's no max rate here. So you want it to be a little bit of wiggle room. Your buyer can always choose to accept a higher rate, but this is to protect them from having to accept a higher rate, right? So you want a little bit of wiggle room, but you also want to, protect your buyer. The lender sometimes on the pre-approval will tell you a rate that they're approved at. You can always ask the lender what interest rate they're approved at so that you know. And then this will be, if it's a 15-year loan, it'll be 15 years. If it's a 30-year loan, it'll be 30 years. I always put 0% on the loan fee. They can choose to pay a loan fee above it, but I always put 0% because I don't want my buyers to be forced to take a loan that has a loan fee of a certain percentage. So I always leave this as 0. Any questions about that so far? Again, this clause here is protect your buyer, but as a listing agent, you want to make sure that this is all, if this says, if going rates are 3.5% and they put 2% in here, that's going to be a little bit of a red flag to you, because that means they're going to be able to get out, 99.9% of the time. Those rates aren't going to drop to 2. So if they just change their mind, they could be like, oh, well, we couldn't get a 2% loan. Well, yeah, of course you can get a 2% loan. Those aren't even, a possibility. So you want to pay attention to that. It should be a reasonable amount. Closing. Anyone ever have someone say, well, let's close on October 31st, but I'll move out on November 15th? It will happen to you at some point in your career. There is a possibility of post-closing occupancy, meaning the seller stays in the property and rents back from the buyer, or pre-closing occupancy, meaning the buyer moves in prior to closing, and typically there's rent paid. 9 times out of 10, the closing is going to be, you're going to put the closing date, everything is going to transfer on the closing date, right? I'm going to hand you all of the money as the buyer. The lender's going to pay the remainder for the purchase price. The deed is going to be signed over, and the buyer gets the keys. The seller's moved out, and when you're closing, when you're signing on the line, that buyer now has the property, the ownership, the keys, and they're able to go and move in. You want to make sure that the closing date that you're putting in here is going to be acceptable with the seller. This is a really typically an easy thing to give a seller when you're the buyer. That conversation before you write this offer, one of those questions is, what's your seller's preferred moving date or closing date? It may be, I think we often assume that the sooner the better, and that's not always the case, right? They might want to close in 30 days. They might also need 45 days. I actually bought a house once, and we put the offer in April, early April, and the seller replied back. We put in like a 30-day closing. The seller replied back that she would prefer to stay in through August. We had no idea that that was going to be the case, but she was building a house, and her house wasn't going to be ready, and she'd lived there for 30 years, and she was older, and for her to like pack things up and put them in storage and live temporarily was going to be a big deal. So we ended up actually getting the property for less money, but allowing her to stay in through like the end of July. So you don't ever really know unless you ask. So find out what that seller's preferred closing date is. In some cases, it just won't work for your buyer, and you'll have to come to an agreement. But if your buyer can give on that closing date, sometimes that's more important than price to the seller. So find out what that is, and know that they're going to be prepared to, move or be ready to move. They're going to sign paperwork for the most part, if they're getting a mortgage, that says they're going to move into that home within 60 days. So have a conversation about that closing date. This term is really helpful in negotiations to get a deal put together. Possession, unless otherwise agreed to, possession, seller agrees to deliver possession of the property at closing. This is why you need to, you know, make sure that everyone's on the same page with the closing. If you're on the listing side, you want to ensure that your clients are going to be able to be moved out. Typically, I make them move out the day before closing so that final walkthroughs can happen and there's no last minute struggle to get somebody out of a house before closing. Real estate taxes, you're going to see our taxes are paid in arrears. So you will often see 2019 instead of 2020 taxes, right? So you're going to go look for the most recent tax bill. You can find that online through the county's site, and whatever the amount is. Now, again, our taxes are paid in arrears, and typically there's some people pay their a whole year's worth of taxes. But typically you've got the first installment and the second installment. When you're looking at online for these taxes, ensure that the amount you're putting down is the full amount, not just the one installment that they've paid. So you can look back at previous years and kind of see what the taxes were. Is there a homeowner's exemption? Is there a senior citizens exemption or a senior freeze? Or is there a historical tax freeze? You can also find these on the county treasurer's site. It will tell you if there's a homeowner's exemption or not, a senior exemption, senior freeze. For those with particularly a senior freeze, those taxes have potential to increase dramatically depending on how long those taxes have been frozen. So get with your real estate attorney to help determine what those taxes likely are to be for your buyers, so that your buyers are not surprised when they get their very first tax bill that does not have the senior freeze on it. And then we're generally going to prorate taxes because we never know exactly what the next assessment is going to be. We usually add a small amount to that to handle any increases, let's be honest. Taxes in Chicago, not going down, only going up. So you're going to often see in here 105%, 110%. Sometimes you'll see more, sometimes you'll be less. Sometimes to get a deal done, you'll take less. You'll take 100%, which is, you know, just what the proration, with no additional proration on that. A lot of times you'll see it blank or TBD. And then the conversation with the listing agent is, let's let the attorneys decide exactly how much they think the taxes are going to be, and we'll agree to that. And that's okay as well. But it's generally going to be, you know, a couple of percentage points above what they were previously. Again, that's a negotiation point there. I once had a buyer who agreed to take 0% proration, which meant they agreed to pay the full tax bill when it was due. We were $5,000 apart on price to get a deal done. My buyer couldn't get any more from the lender. The seller couldn't sell. She was going to be in foreclosure. So there was no additional money. So that $5,000, while a lot of times that's a small amount of money in our negotiations, it was a sticking point in this contract. The lender did not care what the tax proration was in this particular case. So we were able to put in 0%. Those taxes were just over $5,000. And it was enough to make up the difference between buyer and seller to get the deal done. And my seller or my buyer was perfectly fine, you know, pushing that dollar amount out and paying it later. So instead of having the $5,000 at closing, he paid it when it was due later on. So it can be a negotiation point point. Any questions about that? Taxes? Taxes is like a whole class. Like there's a whole class on real estate taxes. This is enough to get you through writing your first contracts, but definitely take a real estate tax class when we've got one on the calendar. Anybody else? Homeowners associations, I always make sure I get a copy of their last bill or a screenshot of their last homeowners association assessment, because a lot of times our sellers don't know, our sellers don't really know what their HOA that it increased in January or whatever. But as the buyer's agent, you're going to look at the MLS sheet to determine what that is and put in the amount of the homeowners association. So a seller represents that as of the acceptance date, the regular monthly assessment pertaining to the property is $300 a month. A special assessment has or has not been levied. Sometimes you'll have a condo building with a special assessment and sometimes not. So check is appropriate. It should be disclosed if they know one's been levied. Sometimes the seller doesn't actually know, and you'll find this out later on when you review your condo docs. And that can change the course of how this contract goes. If there was a special assessment, you'll find out some of the details here to fill this in. What was the original assessment? What's still due? And will the buyer, this shall or shall not be assumed by the buyer at closing. So I don't know if Anne has any particular experience. Sometimes the seller pays, frequently the seller is paying most of it. Sometimes the buyer is paying a portion of it. I find very rarely that the buyer is paying the entire special assessment, but it certainly can happen. It's again a negotiations point. All right, any questions on that? Homeowners associations. Sometimes there's a master homeowner association in addition to the regular homeowners association. The 10.0 spells that out a little bit more clearly, the 7.0. Disclosures. Has your buyer received all of the disclosures that one would need ultimately in closing this transaction? You may have them at the time you're writing and you may not. You may have some of them. So just click yes or no. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. If you go to the MLS listing, as a listing agent or as a buyer's agent, you can often, as a listing agent, you can add them to your listing so that they show up here. And as a buyer's agent, you can find them. So you guys do have all of your disclosures in here. So you can click on this, download it, and have your buyer sign this, review it, sign it if they're in agreement, and include it with your contract, your purchase contract. So in that case, we'd say, yes, they were all there. Yes, yes, yes. Dual agency. If you are the listing agent and you're writing the offer, and you both, buyer and seller, have previously agreed to dual agency, you would need confirmation of dual agency. So there's multiple documents there. If you're on the same team and your team has the listing and your team is also, has the buyer, you'll probably be required to submit all the dual agency paperwork as well. If you're the listing agent and you have a buyer that's unrepresented, you can still fill out the forms for them without, you could have to be honest, obviously, but you, without representing them, you can give them a notice of no agency, fill out the paperwork. You would not be acting as a dual agent in that scenario. But if you are a dual agency, both parties have to agree prior to getting to this point, and then they both have to agree again, confirming consent. They may have thought it was a good idea earlier and have changed their mind, so they have to have confirmed consent here as well. Attorney modification is typically going to be within 5 business days. Sometimes in the busy months, you'll see 7, just because everyone's super busy and the attorneys are behind, but typically you're going to see 5 business days in here. Make sure you understand business days as well. If you get agreement on a Saturday, your day 1 starts on Monday. If you get agreement on Wednesday, at noon, versus 5 o'clock, your next day is, Thursday. Either way, it's the next day is when your days start. Inspection, this is typically going to be also 5 business days. These things can get extended. The attorneys can agree, the parties can agree to extend attorney review. They can also agree to extend inspection. You're typically going to see 5 business days on here. If you put more, even because everyone's behind, the seller's agent, the listing agent, may push back at that and say, why do they need more time? But also take into consideration holidays, if your clients are going on vacation, and just talk with the listing agent to come to agreement. Make sure they're initialing at the bottom of all the pages as well. If you have any riders that you're going to attach to this, FHA, things like that, you would list them in here. You can go through all of the riders at the Chicago Association of Realtors Forms and Contracts site to see the different riders. Some people use this contract shall be of no force or effect if not accepted by a seller on or before a certain date and or certain date and time. In a seller's market, this doesn't really do much of anything. All it does is provide an automatic sort of cancellation for your buyer on this date and that particular date and time. I typically don't do this. On very rare occasions am I putting a deadline like this in, because it doesn't serve a purpose other than to, make the seller and the seller's agent disgruntled. There are certainly reasons and times to use it, but just, if you're putting in an offer and there's going to be 14 offers in on this property, and you put in, they have to respond to you today by 5 o'clock, chances are that's not ever going to happen. So while we would like to force agents to respond to us in a much timelier manner than they might, just be aware of the message that it sends and use it, sparingly use it when it really could be appropriate for your client. We don't want them to lose a deal because of a silly, a date that we put on here that no one's going to pay attention to anyway. And that's the case, right? We can't force a seller to respond to us. We can't force a listing agent to respond in our time frame. Putting a date there, it may add some pressure or they may not care. So don't get too worked up about that particular line. And then make sure you've got buyer signatures. If there's more than one buyer, you need them both to sign an initial on all these lines. Buyer's broker information, seller's broker information, particularly MLS and license number, the brokerage license number, they're going to need those for closing. So make sure that you add those in there. If you want to be super nice and make the seller's agent happy, fill in all of the seller's information that you can find. It's easier to do it in a pre-filled form like this in DocuSign here, or even if you're writing the offer through the MLS, than it is for an agent to go back with a PDF and add all the lines or handwrite it in. So be nice. Get your buyer's deal accepted by doing the little things like asking which form that they would like, which contract do they really want you to use, because some prefer Chicago form and some prefer the 10 point or the 7.0. So ask those questions before you're filling out this contract, and then be nice and fill in as much of this information as you can. You won't know the seller's attorney, but the seller's broker information. It just makes for a better, collegiate professional relationship. And do make sure you put the buyer's lender info in. Ensure that you include a pre-approval letter or proof of funds. And then this whole page is terminology, but they should initial on this bottom line as well. All right. that was a whole lot. What questions do you have?
Can you remind us again what the biggest difference between doing the multi-board and the car contract?
Yeah, so I mean, I prefer the multi-board just because it spells out a lot more stuff and I have a little more control versus giving that up to attorneys to determine later.
Okay.
However, there are certainly agents who want to only do 4 pages and not like 11 or 12, whatever the multi-board is.
Right.
In the city of Chicago, either go. You can do either one. However, you should ask the listing agent which one they prefer. You will probably find 80% of the time they want the Chicago contract, this contract, the car contract, but not always. If you're in the burbs, if you're outside of the city limits, most of those agents are going to want to see the multi-board, the 7.0 used.
Okay.
So that's sort of the difference there.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know we're over our time. I appreciate your time and attention. I'm always available. If you have a follow-up question, you can reach me at Kara, K-A-R-A, Chicago, karachicago.com, karachicago@kw.com. If you have any follow-up questions to this. We talked a little bit about the listing agreement, the listing side of things without going through the full agreement. But we will definitely get another class on the calendar to go specifically through the listing agreement.
Sarah, there's a question in the group chat from someone. I don't know.
Let me go and look.
Hi, that was for me, Anissa. So I was just curious, for our first few contracts, I would hate to get dinged or fined or worse due to something from a simple newbie error. Is there a way to get them like proofread or checked for accuracy, like our first few times submitting one or putting it in?
Yeah, for sure. So for your listing contracts, those are going to be approved by your broker before, I mean, you can fill them out, have your, have your seller sign. Your managing broker is going to push back when you submit them and say, oh, hey, Anissa, you missed this line or whatever. And you can just go back, and I always blame it on, I'll be like, oh, my compliance officer, is making me, I forgot line 6 or whatever. Can you please initial? There's always potential to miss something or make a mistake. It's really not a big deal. But for listing agreements, there's not going to be any fine or anything like that. Your managing broker will just, kick it back to you and say, hey, please, what we see a lot is like the designated agency checkbox didn't get checked or they didn't sign it or something like that. No harm, no foul. Just kick it back to your buyer or to your sellers to add in the line on the.
Okay.
And you're always welcome to, like, what I found is easiest is just post to the Facebook group and say, hey, does anyone have 5 minutes to review my contract? And there's usually someone available. You can send it to your managing broker in advance. Just know that they may not see it for 12 or 24 hours. But if you post, to the Facebook group, one of your colleagues is more than likely willing to, to stop what they're doing and help you out a minute. So
okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, always feel free to go with that option. And if it's something that you're gonna have a listing agreement, you're going to an appointment in a couple of days, get it sent to your managing broker in advance, and they will definitely just send it an email and say, hey, can you look this over? I have a listing agreement. But if you want to get something done that same day, they may just not get to it in enough time, in which case you'll go to your colleague.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
All right. Any other questions? If you have any questions about the listing side before the next class, let me know. I'm happy to go through it with you. I'll try to get something posted online. This was definitely not enough time to do all of the contracts. So appreciate your time, and do reach out if you have any questions. Happy to help you out. karachicago@kw.com. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kara.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.